In January 1970, a group of 31 adventurers from Massachusetts, including both seasoned and novice cavers, set off to explore Knox Cave, a well-known caving spot near Knox, New York. Excitement buzzed through the group as they hiked through the snow to the cave's entrance, hidden in a snow-filled sinkhole. The cave had once been a commercial attraction, but now it was a place for daring explorers who were ready to face its challenges. Knox Cave, with its twisting passages and hidden chambers, was known to be challenging, yet it had long drawn thrill seekers. The group had heard stories about the cave's wild sections, accessible only through a notoriously tight passage known as the Gunbarrel, a keyhole-shaped crawl barely 18 inches in diameter and 60 feet long. Those who passed through the Gunbarrel could explore the untouched parts of the cave, and that was where most of the group was headed. For many, this was the ultimate test of bravery. Squeezing through such a tight space required not only physical effort, but also mental strength. As the group made their way inside the cold, dark cave, 19 of them decided to tackle the Gunbarrel. Among them was 14-year-old Peter Viennes, a first-time caver who was eager to prove himself. Crawling through the tight space was no easy task, but the group pressed on, one by one. Peter, however, was near the end of the line. When Peter reached the narrow Gunbarrel passage, he hesitated. This was the tightest space he had ever seen, more like a tunnel meant for smaller animals than for a human. Taking a deep breath, he squeezed into the small opening. Inch by inch, he dragged himself forward, his body scraping against the rough rock walls. As he was just 8 feet from exiting the passage, disaster struck. His knee slipped into a narrow floor crevice and got wedged tight. He tried to pull it free, but the more he struggled, the more it seemed to get stuck. Panic began to creep in as he twisted his leg, trying desperately to loosen it. His body was wedged in such a way that movement was limited, and every attempt to free himself only caused pain. His breathing grew shallow, his chest constricted by the tight walls of the passage. At first, the group ahead of him were unaware of what had happened. All 18 of them pressed on. Peter cried in pain, and one by one, they began to realize that something was wrong. They called out to him. Peter responded, his voice strained as he explained his predicament. The group soon realized they were stuck along with him as they couldn't get out without Peter getting free first. They quickly tried to free him by pulling and shifting his leg, but nothing worked. Peter was in pain, and the more they tried to help, the more distressed he became. As the minutes dragged on, the temperature in the cave began to drop. The cave's natural chill, combined with their inability to move, made hypothermia a very real threat, not for just Peter, but all the other 18 members stuck inside. People waiting outside began to grow anxious as more than 2 hours passed with no sign of the first group returning from inside the cave. Worried, one of them decided to go in and check. To his shock, he discovered that the entire group was trapped, with Peter wedged in the Gunbarrel, blocking the passage. Without wasting time, he rushed out to inform the others. Soon, everyone was inside trying to help Peter, but their efforts only made things worse. Every attempt to move him caused Peter unbearable pain, and they were forced to stop. Ahead of him, the group was growing increasingly anxious. Some were beginning to panic, the confined space making it difficult to calm their nerves. Some of the younger members of the group began to cry quietly, while the older cavers tried to keep everyone calm. With no way to get him out, they had no other option but to call for help. It was 1:30 p.m. when Peter became stuck, and as the hours passed, the situation became more dire for everyone. Soon, police officers and firefighters arrived at the scene, but when they saw the narrow Gunbarrel and Peter's wedged knee, they realized this was no ordinary rescue. They first tried using a collapsible pike pole to lift Peter's leg, but his cries of pain stopped them in their tracks. At one point, Peter, terrified and exhausted, started screaming that a snake was biting him, though there was no snake, just his mind playing tricks on him in the fear and confusion. After several failed attempts, the rescuers realized brute force wouldn't work. They needed a different approach. 7 hours passed, and the cold was becoming unbearable. If they weren't freed soon, the low temperatures in the cave could lead to dangerous exposure. Finally, Around 8:30 p.m., the rescuers came up with a solution. One member handed down a thermos of soapy water to lubricate Peter's knee and loosen its grip on the crevice. The firefighters then carefully tied a rope around Peter's ankle, but instead of pulling wildly, they coordinated their movements with the people inside the cave. Gently, they began pulling Peter's leg toward his head, while those inside wriggled alongside him, keeping pressure off his knee. Slowly but surely, his knee began to shift, and with one final effort, it popped free from the crevice. The relief was palpable, but the rescuers didn't celebrate just yet. They knew that if they pulled too hard, Peter could slip back into the slot. Carefully, they guided him the rest of the way out, making sure he was completely clear of the tight passage. Finally, after 7 long hours, Peter was free. The 18 cavers behind him could now crawl out to safety, and the threat of hypothermia or further injury had passed. Though exhausted and shaken, Peter and the rest of the group emerged from the cave into the cold night air, grateful to be out of the darkness. What had started as an adventurous day had turned into a rescue mission, but thanks to quick thinking and teamwork, everyone made it out unharmed. On the cool morning of March 23, 2004, Jesus Chawaria Manriquez, 34, was enjoying an outing with his family and friends at Crystal Ball Cave near Gandy, Utah. The day was perfect for relaxation, and the highlight of the trip was the nearby Warm Creek Springs, a popular swimming spot fed by a spring from a lesser-known cave ominously named Beware Cave. The atmosphere was lighthearted as they splashed in the warm waters, but Manriquez, with an adventurous spirit, noticed the dark mouth of Beware Cave feeding the spring. Driven by curiosity, he decided to explore it on his own. The cave was shrouded in mystery, and though not as famous as the commercial Crystal Ball Cave, it drew the attention of those seeking something more. Manriquez entered the cave alone, disappearing briefly into its depths. When he re-emerged, excitement filled his voice. He urged his friends to follow him inside, eager to show them what lay beyond the water. They hesitated at first, but with his infectious enthusiasm, some agreed to explore the entrance of the cave. Once inside, the group marveled at the cave's rocky passageways. Manriquez, always eager to take home a piece of his adventure, encouraged them to collect some rocks from inside. While the others made their way back to the surface with their handfuls, Manriquez lingered in the shadows, determined to find more. He ventured deeper, beyond where anyone else had dared to go. Minutes turned into longer stretches of time, and Manriquez still hadn't returned. His family and friends, waiting near the pool, grew anxious. They called out for him, their voices echoing in the cave, but there was no reply. Panic began to creep in. It wasn't like Manriquez to stay silent for so long. When he still didn't return, they rushed to alert the cave's managers and asked for help. Rescue teams were quickly dispatched to the scene. They entered the cave with urgency, knowing that every second counted. The passage was filled with 3 to 4 feet of water, but there was typically enough breathing space above the surface to navigate safely, at least in the early part of the cave. However, about 10 feet in, the way was blocked by a veil of stalactites. The rescuers realized that to continue, they would have to submerge themselves beneath the cold water. It was behind these stalactites that they found Manriquez. He had attempted to pass through the narrow submerged section, but had become trapped by the force of the water. His body was wedged tightly in the passage, a silent testament to the power of the cave. It was obvious that as he tried to navigate past a veil of stalactites, the force of the water pushed him into a tight space. His body, caught between jagged rock formations, became wedged in a way that left him completely trapped. The current pressed him deeper into the constriction, pinning his torso while his legs remained partially submerged. The narrow passage left little room to maneuver, and with each struggle, the surrounding rocks dug into his skin, making escape impossible. His attempts to free himself only wedged him tighter, as the relentless water and unforgiving walls sealed his fate. Despite the best efforts of the rescuers, it was clear that he had drowned, likely after being unable to free himself from the dangerous current that surged through the narrow tunnel. Rescuers brought in a winch system to carefully free Manriquez's body, as pulling by hand had failed. Divers positioned themselves in the narrow, water-filled passage, securing ropes around his body without worsening his position. Slowly, the winch was engaged, inching him free despite the water's pressure. After a long, delicate work, they finally extracted him, though they knew he had drowned long before. The sharp stalactites and flowing water made the process both dangerous and exhausting. The cave's dark beauty had turned deadly in an instant. For Manriquez, an afternoon of exploration had become a final, tragic adventure. His family, still in shock, would forever remember the day not for its laughter, but for the loss of a beloved father, son, and friend. Mark, Jason, and Luke had been planning their weekend caving trip for months. Their destination was the infamous Grim Reaper Cave, a labyrinthine network of passages and chambers renowned for its treacherous terrain and unsettling sounds. Local stories spoke of narrow tunnels, hidden crevices, and eerie echoes that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. Despite the ominous warnings, the group entered the cave poorly prepared. They had only basic flashlights to light their way, and their clothing, jeans, thin jackets, and sneakers, was woefully inadequate for the cave's unforgiving environment. Mark brought a worn-out rope, its fibers weakened by time and wear, while Jason packed a single bottle of water, grossly underestimating the expedition's duration. As they crawled deeper into the cave's depths, the tunnels became increasingly tighter. Mark's concern grew exponentially as he realized the path ahead was treacherously constricted, the sharp edges of the rocks threatening to scrape and snag at their bodies. The air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and mold. Disaster struck mere minutes later. Mark slipped, wedging himself between two jagged boulders. His body was squeezed so tightly that escape seemed impossible. Jason, trapped behind him, found his arm pinned beneath Mark's body, the weight of his friend's torso threatening to crush his limb. Panic began to set in. Luke, the last in line, realized the severity of their situation. He tried his best to free up Jason, but his efforts went futile. If only he could reach and rescue Mark, the situation might turn into their favor. However, with Jason stuck just behind Mark, things seemed difficult. The air was growing thinner, and the damp chill of the cave was seeping into their bones, hypothermia looming over them. He could feel the air quality diminishing as the tunnel became more oppressive. The stakes were clear. If he didn't act quickly, Mark could suffocate, Jason would lose his composure, and they all could succumb to the conditions. Recognizing the desperate need for external aid, he reluctantly left his friends, embarking on the arduous journey back to the surface. The darkness seemed to close in around him as he navigated the winding tunnels. Breathless and frantic, Luke reached the surface, hastily alerting the local search and rescue team to the crisis unfolding beneath their feet. Within the hour, a specialized cave rescue unit arrived, equipped with an array of advanced tools designed specifically for such perilous extractions. The team swiftly deployed a portable monitoring device, confirming their worst fears. Oxygen levels had plummeted, while carbon dioxide concentrations had spiked to hazardous levels. To combat this, they rapidly prepared a lightweight oxygen delivery system designed to sustain the trapped men until rescue. Led by seasoned rescuers, the team descended into the cave, navigating the treacherous terrain with caution. Armed with rock drills, carbide-tipped chisels, and inflatable air bladders, their challenge was to widen the crevice without compromising the cave's fragile structural integrity. Mark's situation was precarious in the extreme, his chest compressed by the rocks to the point where breathing had become a torturous struggle. The medics knew they had to act with haste to prevent catastrophic internal injuries. Jason, pinned beneath Mark, faced severe circulation issues, his arm numb and pale. The rescuers prioritized Jason's freedom, carefully positioning a rescue harness around his torso. Utilizing a mechanical advantage pulley system, they painstakingly pulled him backward, guiding his feet to find small footholds in the uneven terrain. Once Jason was freed, the team focused on extracting Mark. They inserted an air bladder, gradually inflating it to create sufficient space between Mark's body and the rock. Applying steady tension, they inched him out, finally pulling him free, battered, bruised, and bloodied, yet alive. Medics swiftly attended to the men's conditions, administering treatment for hypothermia and severe dehydration. Mark and Jason owed their lives to the rescue team's expertise, technology, and selfless bravery. As they emerged from the cave, blinking in the bright sunlight, the trio realized the gravity of their mistake. They vowed never to underestimate the power of nature again, grateful for a second chance.